Alright, so for my students here, I wanted to continue with this lesson on texturing and such. So basically I took this model and in about 4 hours I textured a character here. Um, so I wanted to kind of walk through on what I did and how I did it. Alright, so basically this is the quick render here. And pretty much what I did, just to show you guys, it's 6 maps. I could have probably condensed it to more, but 6 was fine for what I was doing. And basically, it's the body, the head, the mask, the head, um, the shoulder plates, all the accessory stuff, and then the final like bat. I don't know, whatever that is on the bottom. And this is the final texture here. And so what I was doing is basically, I'll start from scratch here. So what I basically did was I rendered all the maps like this, and I just put them into its initial state, and then from there, what I did was the simple thing, and all I did was lay down my base colors. Now, the base colors, I just used a solid round brush for most of this, and what I did was just lay down my base colors and simply fill that in there. Now, what I did was, these are my base, and then I decided that I was going to create a light leather, and I kept these separate so that I can use them as selecting masks, so that when I'm painting, I can simply go in there and holding in, I believe it's, let me double check this, holding in control, I can, select different portions. Um, and so that's the only reason these are separated as they are, so that I could easily paint stuff in there and just select things that were in general more or less kind of hand painted in there. So that's the first thing that I did. I basically filled my colors in, really simple, really quick. And then what I did was I started rendering my shadows. Now I'm going to open this up here, and what I did here was I basically baked it, and you can find a ton of tutorials online about baking textures. But essentially, what I did was I baked this. Get this bigger so you guys can kind of see this. And I baked the textures in there, and the textures by themselves, they're going to have artifacting in, much like this little like triangle here and things like that. And you can go in there, and on that layer you can simply kind of grab those and kind of blend those in a little bit. And that's kind of all I did, was just went in there and blended these colors in there. Um, and so what I did was I've actually got two here. So the first one is the simple shadows. It's set on a multiply layer. It's a little bit lower than what it should be. It's probably at 98% here, but so what that does is um, gives you a base shadow, or the base placements of where your shadow would lie. Okay, and so then what I did was, and I can show you some of the maps here. And the maps, 3D Studio Max render them all individually. So all I did was selected them all and put them as exclusion maps. And I rendered the shadows and the lighting maps from that, and that gives me just kind of a nice base to start with. And then what I did was, on this, you'll see there's an adjustment layer, and a lot of times we don't use this stuff, but what I did here was um, essentially use these adjustment layers. So underneath, I didn't use as much darks, and I split the lights. So what that essentially did was give me kind of a highlight to, and I set it to pin light, and I don't want the solid pin light. So what I did was I set it to um, kind of a mid-tone pin light, um, and that gave me my highlights as well as my shadows. Now the colors are very dull and bland at this, so that point I went in and started adding textures. Now my texture library is, I only grabbed a couple textures here. But essentially what my texture library was, as you can see, kind of a leather texture for the leather pieces. I grabbed some elephant texture I found, like it's kind of like almost a craquelure texture, and I put that in according to the overlaid on the skin, and I have masks on each one of these so that I can paint without worrying about going into and painting, additional pieces. I added leather, I added cloth, I added metals. I added a lot of metal actually. You more or less grabbed the same metal over and over and just kind of played with it. And then I added a different type of leather to add a little bit of contrast. That's essentially all I did was I just added textures to it. Now in the overlay mode, that's mostly what the textures are, and honestly the textures are just a start. You never want to stop on just the textures, and the reason that is because the simple fact that textures are never good enough by themselves. Then what I did was I just grabbed some lips and eyes and I kind of masked out them. And the reason I masked everything is because if I need to go back in and grab stuff, essentially it's all there and all ready for me so that I can go in and kind of fix things. Then I felt the textures added a little bit more than I wanted, so I added another shadow layer over it to kind of bring the highlights a little bit back. And then I added borders here around the leather, which was nothing special. I just wanted the edges to stand out a little bit. That's when I essentially, this up to this point, it only took me about an hour and a half. Simply just dropping in textures, placing around, cleaning up masks, things like that. And that gives me a good base texture. It's got a good section so that from there I can actually paint or I can do other things. Now what I did here was I created two layers, one screen and one multiply. Now the multiply layer is my details. It's my darks, it's my lights, things like that. And it's essentially just a real quick, real fast push down of dark colors. What I did was if you look here, I'll zoom up here. So if you look, all I did, like here, the texture by itself is very flat. But with the multiply in there, it gives me shadows, it gives me wrinkles. I did a little bit in the legs and thighs, and that gives me some depth as far as the low poly model. And so that's another thing that I kind of played with. And so then after that, you also need to highlight things as well. And I didn't use as many highlights, but all I did was essentially just add highlights to create a better sense of form. And that's really what you're doing on a low poly model with Photoshop, is you have no real form, so you need to basically bring it out and bring your own form into the model. And that's why if you look on the buckle here, without those details, the buckle is a flat piece of metal. With those details, it's got dimension and thickness. And then so essentially what I did was, once I was done with that, essentially I just added another layer with little bits and pieces and this is a normal layer. And the reason I did normal is because I just want some different colors in there. And at about 4 hours, I'm starting to put this away to bed. There's a lot more that I can do with it. In this case I added blood, but there's also things like I can create a new layer, and with just the soft round I can go in and add a little bit of color, and we're just going to add a little bit of that. And so like on the knees and things like that, I can simply go in, and I don't want full color, but with this base color I can go in and start putting in places that would be show more bone towards the end. So I would probably put a little bit there, You know, I could probably put some in the cheeks. And it's subtle, but it adds a little bit of difference to uh, the actual cloud, or I'm sorry, the map. And right now I'm doing thick, but let me go here and erase this. But I can go in and add these subtle blues and things like that, and lower the opacity down so they don't have to be super dark, but it's just a matter of giving it a little bit of a texture, a color difference. And those are things that I can do as well. Um, and then like an example of me playing with the multiply layers would be simply going in and looking at some anatomy for this and just kind of roughly painting. I'm just going to lower my opacity here. And basically just me roughly painting in the details of things like that in there. All right, and that's all essentially what I'm doing is I'm just kind of building in those details, um, of the back muscles or whatever else I need to paint, and that's all it is layers upon layers of detail. So going from the base texture, and I'm just going to going from the base texture map to add on the base colors, then I added my shadows and highlights, and I added textures, and then started adding some details, um, and a little bit more shadow information. And so basically, simply by doing these layers all in, the way things reflect, as you can see here on the corner pieces, what I've done is essentially added in just highlights on the corners, so that gives the edge of that bat a little bit more depth to it. And all of those things add form and shape to it. And then, the more details, in this case I just added blood, but in all reality, there's a lot more that I could do. I could add blood, I could add dirt, I could add, grime, and it's all just how things collect through the textures, through, whatever this character does. It's it's that type of thing to keep going, keep pushing yourself to get better at your textures. All right, I hope that helps.